and welcome to BrightSafe webinar this time, in which we go through a series of our webinars helping you, the client, actually get involved with the software a bit more, a bit deeper, and help understanding to that level. Today I have with me Mr. Larry Drusen, the Manager of Work Health and Safety at EmploySure, a content creator for BrightSafe, and really the driving force of all things health and safety here at our group. Welcome, Larry.
Thank you very much, David.
Brilliant. Look, today what we're going to do, Larry, is we've been receiving a lot of questions and queries, whether that be on the phone with our clients, through email, or just through the feedback button in the application itself, with people trying to find out a little bit more about health and safety, wanting to tap into your knowledge, which is why we put this together here today, so that we could answer those questions. So if it's all right with you, Larry, I've got 12 questions to go through, and we can expand on that as we keep going.
Let's see if we can help our clients.
Excellent. First question is, what are my basic obligations I must do in my workplace for health and safety?
Broadly speaking, an employer or a PCBU is required to ensure that the workplace is healthy and safe for the workers to undertake their work. And that will range from providing sufficient welfare facilities, from washing facilities and heating facilities, through to ensuring that any plant and equipment that anyone is using in the workplace is safe to use, and that they have various procedures in place to ensure that the workers understand how to use that piece of equipment safely. There's some underpinning principles that guide that through. That is all intended to be done in consultation with the workers, so the workers are engaged in knowing what is required of them to be safe. And of course, that also involves them being appropriately trained, so they know how to approach their work and undertake their work safely. But ultimately, it is the employer or the PCBU's responsibility to provide a healthy and safe workplace.
Okay, excellent. The natural flowing question for me there is, what are the consequences of ignoring all of these obligations you've just said?
Well, there's a number of consequences that can come about through ignoring the overall principles of providing a health and safety workplace. Firstly, there's the regulatory consequences, and that is from the various regulators around the nation and in New Zealand. They each have their own framework of penalties that they can apply, but in terms they follow a tiered approach, and that is being prosecuted through the courts, which can result in very, very significant fines, and in some cases in regard to individuals, extreme cases, can lead to jail terms for individuals. Then we tip down to basically on-the-spot fines for lesser offences, where they can be issued a fine on the spot. And then they have the what we call the prohibition or improvement notices, where the regulator can enforce changes within the workplace by the issue of an improvement notice, or even stop a workplace from operating through the issue of a prohibition notice. Of course, they're the tangible things that come about through non-compliance. Of course, non-compliance has a much wider impact upon an organisation. It impacts upon the morale of the organisation, it impacts upon the staff turnover, impacts upon the training needs of an organisation by people leaving the organisation because they're not satisfied. And so there is a social and a moral and a financial cost involved in not complying with health and safety legislation.
Lots of reasons to comply.
Absolutely, absolutely. From financial through to social through to moral obligations to comply to ensure workers go home safely at the end of the day.
Okay. Now, with you being such a heavy contributor to the design around BrightSafe for ANZ market, can you comment on how BrightSafe provides an advantage around health and safety within a workplace?
BrightSafe is a means of providing the framework for an organisation to be able to comply with the health and safety requirements through the documentation that is provided through our consultants, which basically sets up the framework, sets up the course of action to be undertaken by the PCB or the employer to implement their health and safety system. BrightSafe can assist through that. There are a number of major features in BrightSafe that help with that as underpinning principles through risk assessments, through learning, through consultation, and through training of the workers so that they can understand what they have to do to operate safely within the workplace. And BrightSafe gives them an easy platform and an accessible platform to assist with the implementation of those principles.
Yeah, I completely agree. You know, the paperless aspect of it allows them to securely store is what I'm trying to say. The documents, access them on the go, and in the end, it provides evidence, which I guess is the most important thing for a business owner.
From a regulatory point of view, the business owners must be able to demonstrate that they are undertaking the various activities and the actions that they say they're going to be undertaking.
Yeah.
Meet their compliance responsibilities. And the best way to do that is to record your actions and identify them and to have them easily accessible, not only for the regulator coming in, but as evidence for the organisation as a whole to be able to demonstrate they are undertaking those actions. They're doing everything they can that is reasonably practical to ensure the health and safety of their workers.
Okay, brilliant. Now, you spoke a lot in that answer about framework. Can you talk to me about the difference between, we've had this conversation before about system versus framework. Can you define that a bit clearer?
Sure. There is a bit of confusion out there about what is a system. A system, there are good systems and essentially there are bad systems because the system itself is meant to be a closed loop system approach, and that is what EmploySure can provide for you is the framework of a system. We give you the tools to implement a system, but it still requires action on behalf of the employer or the PCBU to implement those actions. And by implementing the actions and recording those actions and gathering that evidence that we spoke of, starts to complete that system. The system is completed by continually improving what you're already doing. And you can only do that by making sure you've got the records to review over a period of time. So you go back and review what you've achieved, you've reviewed your deficiencies, put corrective actions in place. So that's completing the cycle of the system that we talk about a system. So we provide we provide the tools.
Excellent.
The business to complete it, do the action to complete a system approach.
Excellent. So you would define BrightSafe as a tool to implement a system.
Absolutely.
Part of.
Absolutely, an excellent tool at that, and with the guidance it gives and
brilliant.
Yeah, very good.
Okay. One question, and actually I'll probably answer this one. One question that we get quite a lot is when I sign up with EmploySure and I've had my implementation meetings with the health and safety consultant. There's a lot of documents. They've all come at me. You know, it's a giant framework that has been given to me. How do I organize this a little bit so that I can use it? My answer would be BrightSafe and really BrightHR both have document storage, unlimited document storage, allows you to assign documents in BrightSafe to sites specifically. So if there's documents associated to that site that you've implemented, I highly recommend using BrightSafe for that ability. And it also gives your supervisors or even employees on site to be able to download those documents if they need to access them there. So it's cloud-based. As long as you've got internet, you can access them. Would you agree with that, Larry?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think where we're heading with ongoing improvements in BrightSafe, as you've alluded to, that the clients will be able to actually pinpoint the most important documents. Clearly, we provide quite a lot of documentation. Some can sort of be rested until you become more matured in implementing the system as such. Others you need to have in place fairly quickly and to be compliant with the legislation. And I think BrightSafe has the ability then to identify those particular priority documents. And but meanwhile, we've got the others that we can refer to as that are stored that we can refer to as we improve our implementation of our system. So I agree.
Okay. Excellent. How often should I look at my WHS obligations?
Quite regularly, actually. I guess the biggest thing is to concentrate on is whenever there's a major change within the workplace.
Okay.
Safety documents are not set in concrete. The documents themselves are meant to be living, breathing documents because things change. The environment is dynamic. Businesses are dynamic. Businesses introduce new plant machinery. They introduce new chemicals. They introduce new ways of doing things to produce whatever they are producing, whether it be a service or a product. So whenever there's a major change within the workplace, you need to basically go back and review what you've done in the past, review what controls you have in place to minimise the risk in the workplace. It may mean actually reducing controls, but you need to be on top of any major changes within the workplace just to make sure that the controls, the control risks that you do have in place are appropriate at various stages, various life cycle of the system, so to speak. If there are no major changes within the workplace, we still recommend that you go back and look at all that documentation, look at all your reports, look at all your records at least every 2 years.
Okay, brilliant. Now, I heard you speaking about controls there quite a bit, and I'm only asking this question because when I first started working with health and safety a couple of years ago, I had no idea about certain terminology. Now, this next question will allow you to probably go into it deeper here, Larry. It says, what's a risk assessment? Who conducts them? And how often am I supposed to use them?
Yeah.
Do you mind weighing in there? That's a three-part question there, but do you mind weighing in?
It's a three-part question. I hope I answer it all in one. The risk assessment is basically looking at a particular operation or a particular process within the workplace and looking at the likelihood that someone could be injured doing that, and then looking at what the consequences are. And essentially, that's what a risk assessment is. It's doing that assessment between the likelihood and the potential consequences if it does happen. They can be quite confusing and quite overwhelming, but we do risk assessments every day of our life without even realising it. In its simplest form, if you open the front door in the morning, you look to see whether it's raining or not. You actually do a risk assessment to see whether you're going to go back and get your umbrella or not. You undertake a risk assessment. So in its simplest form, it is no more than that. But of course, you then need to apply that principle to each part of the workplace where there are potential hazards and plant and equipment and chemicals and processes and procedures that you have in place.
Okay. Can we break that example down a bit further? So you're about to step outside. It's now raining out.
Yep.
The risk is you can slip and fall. You're going to get your clothes wet. Can you talk to me about what the control measures are there to reduce that? What were the examples?
Yeah, it depends on how hard it's raining. If it's sprinkling, you might make the risk assessment. Well, look, all I'm going to do is dash to the car, and the consequences are that I might get a little bit wet, as long as the driveway is non-slippery. So I'm going to take that risk. I'm not going to put any controls in place.
Okay.
As opposed to going back and getting the umbrella, that's a control to stop me getting wet. And I'm going to make sure that I've got the appropriate shoes on that they're non-slip on the tiles or on the driveway. So there are a number of things that can happen by walking outside. So you're looking at the potential likelihood that it could happen and the consequence, be it from getting wet to slipping over and breaking your leg.
Okay. Wow. We're not trying to scare any of our clients to going outside here, but it's a good way to break it down. Makes it very simple. How often are we running risk assessments?
Risk assessments are really the pinnacle or one of the major columns or pillars of the health and safety system. And the first approach should be that you identify all the hazards in the workplace and undertake a risk assessment. You look at the hazard, you look at the likelihood that someone could be injured and the consequence of it. Things change, as we said. The whole system should be dynamic, as is the workplace being dynamic. So the ultimate aim of doing a risk assessment is you identify the particular controls that you need to put in place to control that risk, hopefully eliminate the risk. That's not necessarily always possible. So you look at the sort of controls to minimise that risk.
Okay.
So you change that piece of machinery, for example, then you're going to possibly change the risk, either up or down. So you should undertake another risk assessment to It might mean you can reduce the controls. It might mean you don't need any more controls because the controls are essentially built into the machine. Depends on the change. It might eliminate the need for the wearing of PPE, or personal protective equipment, for example. So they should be undertaken whenever there is a change that in all likelihood the risk level could change, either up or down.
Okay, really good advice there. If I was to be investigated, if I'm a business owner and I'm investigated or audited and you've got a regulator on site, will they ask about risk assessments?
They certainly will, because they're a pillar of the system.
Okay.
It's the only way really to demonstrate that you understand your business and that you understand the hazards and the risks associated with your business, and that you're doing everything that you can do reasonably practical to control those risks. And the legislation is underpinned by the principle of what is reasonably practicable to achieve. And so the only way you can really demonstrate that you're taking that into consideration is to be able to demonstrate now the evidence that you are undertaking risk assessments, and you're doing that assessment between consequence and likelihood, and you're identifying the various controls that might need to be put in place. Of
course. I'll weigh in with what BrightSafe is capable of, and BrightSafe, two main things around risk assessments, three probably. They've got a creator, it's built in. You can go step by step, just as Larry has said. You go step by step, filling out what you're assessing, who's assessing it, what the hazards and controls are, and the likelihood of it occurring. The last step to it, though, allows you to set the next date in which you review. So it does set a reminder, it creates a task, and it keeps it centralized in one system. The other advantage here is it's cloud-based. Should a regulator come in for whatever reason, an accidents occur or just a simple audit, all of your evidence is saved in one place. How many times you reviewed that risk, what control measures you've put in each time, it's all going to be there documented as you go along. And the final thing is, it really does go over to credit to Larry and his team. We've added, I think we're at 180 risk assessments now, something like that.
And growing.
and growing, of pre-completed risk assessments. So just because we tell you it can do it doesn't mean you know how or you don't have an example. Now what we've done is we've put 180 completed risk assessments that span from childcare through to warehousing, through to construction, back up to you name the industry, we've covered it off, that are going to give you templates as to how you can use or what you can use, and then edit those and just use that as a working template. So it doesn't have to just be a plug and play. It can be very simple or very intuitive to go into your business.
Absolutely.
All right. So we've also, other workplace work health and safety documents around SWIMS. You hear SOPs, all these funny acronyms and names and different things. Can you explain, the difference between a SWIMS and a SOP and a RA and that? Can you give us some siloed approach?
We like our acronyms in the world of health and safety, I've got to say.
Yeah.
But you've identified a significant issue out there in industry that I know all of our consultants and advisors deal with on a daily basis, and that is this confusion between some of this documentation.
Yep.
And particularly in relation to what we call SWIMS, which is a safe work method statement, and how that intertwines with a safe operating procedure or a safe work procedure, as they're also known as.
Yep.
Just to clarify though, a SWIMS or a safe work method statement is the only real reference in the legislation where it references a particular requirement to have a safe procedure documented. And that is, but it is only required in the construction sector, and it is only required for designated high-risk construction activities, which are detailed in the legislation of what they apply to. Construction, of course, being a high-risk activity within itself. But within construction itself, there are some activities that have a much higher risk than others. For example, working at a height is much more hazardous than working on the ground. So working at height is one of those things where you have to have a SWIMS developed. And there are various operations that in the construction sector where you legally have to have a safe work method statement. A safe work method statement is not intended to be or to replace a risk assessment, for example. It is meant to be a step-by-step approach of how you address the issues in relation to that high-risk construction activity. So if you're going to be working at heights, you identify how you're going to work at heights, what controls you're going to have in place, and it's basically a step-by-step approach to undertaking that particular work. There's a range of high-risk activities that are specifically defined under the legislation, slight variations across the legislation, but generally pretty much the same. But it is those high-risk activities that you'll come to mind in working in construction, such as working at heights, working in deep excavations and working near mobile plant, next to roadworks, next to railway lines and so forth, working over water. So it really, from a legal perspective, that's where you legally have to have a safe work method statement, a step-by-step guide of how you are going to do that work in the safest means possible. There are also some requirements that the safe work method statement it must be site specific, so it must apply to the specific site that the work is being undertaken. So you need to identify anything particular around that site, be there overhead lines, be there underground services that you've got to take into account, the things that you can only identify when working on a particular site. The workers who are going to undertake the work must be basically trained in the SWIMS, and they must understand what those step-by-step procedures are. And of course, the SWIMS need to be kept available, not only for the workers, but also for regulators coming on site to demonstrate.
Sure.
Now, the SWIMS can be reasonably complex because if you are working on heights, it's not just a matter of working at height that you've got to deal with. You've got to deal with actually getting to the height, making sure that the area around is clear. So it's got each of those steps in place that you're required to have various controls in. As opposed to a safe operating procedure or a safe work procedure, as some people call them. There's no incorrect way of indicating it. We do call them safe operating procedures. They are generally a document that applies to working safely on one particular piece of plant or equipment. So it applies to only a tool. It's not a step-by-step guide into how to undertake a number of processes or procedure. Is meant to be a single procedure, or sorry, a single approach for one piece of plant or equipment, and it usually has a step-by-step guide on how to operate that particular plant, but that only applies to, generally speaking, to one piece of plant or equipment and how to
like a lift truck or a pressure washer or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Forklift is a great example. You'll have a safe operating procedure for a forklift, and it'll start from getting into the forklift appropriately. You've got 3 points of contact. You don't just jump onto the seat and fall out the other side. And then some guidance on how you go about operating that forklift in a safe manner. Yeah.
Okay. And in a changing
major distinction between them.
Okay. Between those two, in a changing environment like that, because that's when SWIMS tend to come out. They're new build or large high-risk construction. Are risk assessments also going to be used in situations like that, or what's the overlap here? Absolutely.
In actual fact, the risk assessment should be the first thing you're doing. You're actually identifying hazards in the site, in the workplace.
Okay.
When you're identifying those hazards, you then identify which ones are high-risk activities. So the risk assessment should basically have already been done. That's why I say the SWIMS is risk assessment. It should have already been done. So in identifying all the hazards in the workplace, you then get to identify a number that come into that category of high risk. So you take that one step further and develop a SWIM for that high risk activity. So you've still got your risk assessment in place for every hazard in the workplace.
Yeah, wow. Okay. No, that makes it very clear. This is going to be an on-demand webinar, so you're welcome to go back, rewind that, listen to that explanation again, because there's some real gold nuggets in what Larry has just said. There is a question here when will I ever need access to these once I complete them? I mean, pretty much all the time, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, from a legal perspective, they need to be maintained as close as possible to the site that they apply to. They need to be accessible to show the regulator. They need to be maintained as evidence if there is an incident related to high risk activity, and there's various lengths of times where they need to be maintained. Plus, they need to be, and probably more importantly, they need to be reviewed quite regularly. You can't just take one swim from one site to the other. And even in the site itself that applies to, things will change. The site will be dynamic. Therefore, the swim needs to be reviewed to ensure, quite regularly, to ensure that it's still applicable to the various hazards at that site. And when you move to another site, you need to ensure that any new swim that you develop is specific to that site. So, and so they should be reviewing their swims quite regularly to ensure that they are able to capture it. They understand how to develop the swims and hopefully improve as they go along as well. Because by reviewing what you've already done will help improve going forward, which, by improving the swims is only going to give a greater safety factor to those really high risk activities in the construction sites.
Okay, brilliant. And, the great thing about storing it on BrightSafe, again, I've already repeated this, but cloud-based, any file type. So you can actually snap a photograph of an updated swim, stick it in there, categorize it, make it site specific, and save it there so that if your supervisors on site need to communicate with the team back home, it can all be stored in a central location. So you can review.
Even internally, they're required to ensure, like you just said the supervisor. The supervisor has a responsibility to ensure that they are working towards the swim, that they're following the steps in the swim. So it's important that they've got access to it to ensure that is happening, because if you're not operating in accordance with the swim, legally the whole work should cease. So they can review the swim, implement different procedures or steps to put in place. That's good.
I don't know many businesses that can afford to cease operations because they're not following the plan.
Sure.
All right. A question about the e-learning courses here. You had a massive part in constructing these and making sure they were pinpoint accurate to our legislature. What advantages to my business do e-learning courses provide?
Well, look, I think they're going to be invaluable going forward, and they're only growing in numbers as we produce more and more. I think from the outset, one of the major pillars of providing a health and safety workplace is to ensure that all your workers and all your employees are trained to the level that they are competent in their job and that they can do that job safely. Now, that can usually only be achieved through appropriate training and ensuring that they have achieved the competency required to either operate that piece of plant and equipment, even to operate, office machinery and so forth. So the e-learning courses is a gateway to that training and gaining that competency level that the legislation requires of workers. And it gives learning modules.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've just seen a couple more pop in. I think it was about 2-3 weeks ago, and I know you're still you're working on other topics, but the evidence it provides at the end of it with the assessment, which aren't easy. If you try and skip to the bottom like I did, you will definitely fail them a couple times. And then the certificate that states they've passed, which can be saved to their BrightHR profile, and you have a record of when they've completed their last course.
I've even
fantastic
100% in some of the courses myself, and I wrote the assessments.
Proof health and safety is no joke, and it needs to be taken seriously and organized. So glad we've got this tool here for our clients. The last question here is, if I have a WHS related question while completing something in BrightSafe, while using the tool that we're talking about today, should I call EmploySure? Is that part of what I should do, or how do I get help about my health and safety content?
Our clients are very fortunate in that they not only have these tools up front that we provide for them, but they also have an advisory service that is available to them basically around the clock. They and they can call basically at any time, get any technical advice, get any assistance on even using BrightSafe or the e-learning modules and how they go about it. But importantly, it's an advisory service from specialist health and safety advisors who generally come from a consultancy background and keep themselves up to date with contemporary issues that are arising in the world of health and safety. So to have that service available is absolutely invaluable. Absolutely invaluable.
Fantastic. And you know, to flip that, if you're dealing with a health and safety piece and you don't know what to do with the tool with BrightSafe, that's what myself and my team do. We support during business hours. You're welcome to call us. We've got an AU and an NZ number, AU and an NZ email, just brighthr@employsure.com.au or .co.nz. Ask us questions about the software. We're here to support you. We want to make the tool as easy as possible to go along with the advice and the content that is provided from EmploySure.
Excellent. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, thanks very much for attending. If you do have more questions, and I'm sure we've really sparked some things for you. If you have more questions about either the software or what Larry has spoken about it and the obligations, here we've got a Q&A section. I implore you to go in there, place your question in there, and what we'll do is we'll come back and we can answer those questions in a response email. But thanks very much for attending today, guys.
Thanks a lot.